This is the How Did We Get Here podcast with your host, Nancy Jackson.
Hi, I'm Nancy Jackson, and I will be your host for this program called How Did We Get Here? And I hope that you like and subscribe to the program, which is the first of a series to explore things that are going on in our world that they come from all directions. And every time I see another report on the news, I ask myself, why is this happening and how did we get here? So I invite you to come along with me. And if you like the show, hit the like button and subscribe. And my plan is to have a series of programs, broadcasts, and interview different people who are experts or who have knowledge of different events that have taken place that might be able to explain to us some of the backstories or why things have come to us the way they have. So I've always watched the news. I've always kept up with things, but it never really bothered me. When I look back, I realized that the things were really starting to bother me and get my attention maybe 15 years ago. Because things just didn't ring true. I would hear something and I think, no, that's not right. How could that be? It just doesn't ring true to me. So what I did was I started taking a closer look, taking notes when I heard people say things. And I started doing more reading, and I collected all this information and kind of threw it in a basket. And I thought, well, I'll deal with it later. Well, it piled up and got bigger and bigger and bigger. And it got to the point where I just decided that I was going to sort through things and see if I could come up with a pattern or some kind of interpretation, maybe connecting dots to see if there was a pattern in the events that have been taking place. That sometimes I just scratch my head and I think, what is this and why is it happening? So my goal in this podcast is to take a closer look at some of these events that have been going on and see if we can find a trend or a pattern. Sometimes we have to step back and look at the big picture. And then other times we have to look up close to see something, maybe the story behind the story. I plan to do both with the help of some of these other people that I think you're going to find really interesting. I certainly have, the more I've gotten into this. And what I did was, the first thing I did when I was pulling things out of the basket was to create a timeline. And I had to start with a beginning and an end. And so I limited my exploration to the late 1800s, because there were a lot of significant events that took place that I was surprised about when I found out about them. And I actually created a timeline of events, things that were, I thought, surprising or informative or formative and influential in changing the direction of our politics, our government, our religion, our faith, our culture, all of these things. They've all been influenced so much. And my big question is why? We can look through the eyes of a secular humanist, and you're going to interpret things one way. You can look at things through the eyes of a skeptic and a critic and see things another way. Or you can look at things through the eyes of faith and faith in God, and you're going to come up with a different interpretation. It just depends on what your prism is. And in this account that I'm doing and with this podcast, it's through the eyes of faith. I am an active Catholic Christian, a lifelong Christian, and one who has continued to learn as I've gone along and study my whole life. So I always have that in the back of my mind. And I do see Jesus Christ as the key influencer in all of these things that are happening. And I see him as the hero of the story. And it is a long story. I mean, we could go back 2,000, 3,000, 5,000 years. But for the sake of time, I've tried to make, as I said, I just limited this timeline for this purpose in the last 100 or 150 years. And I'm trying to make it as brief as possible. And I just want to kind of skim through a few things that are in my timeline trace. So our focus begins in the 1800s and proceeds to the present. And I have to say that our ancestors would roll over in their grave if they saw what was going on today. They wouldn't even recognize this place because it's changed so dramatically in the last 100 to 150 years through advances and revolutions and inventions and everything that's happened. It's just a completely different world and a completely different environment. But I will just give you a few of these things that are in my timeline. One would be the Act of 1871, which had a huge effect on our country and our government, the way our government was run. The United States was almost bankrupt after the Civil War. And so there were some things that had to be done. And anyway, so there's a long story behind the Act of 1871. Another thing that happened was, of course, World War I and World War II. The Russian, the overthrow of the czars in Russia in the early 1900s. The Jekyll Island Conference that took place in Georgia was a secret conference that took place that had an immense effect on our financial system. And it was, there were a select group of men that were chosen to come to that meeting. And actually it led to the establishment of the Federal Reserve. So that's another story. And it's really important that we understand what that was and how we've been affected by that. Some other things that happened, of course, World War I, World War II, the advance of communism and the influence of all of that in our country. And then we have the 60s that were wild and revolutionary and just an explosion of things that changed our world forever. And then we could go all the way to the 1990s, where you had heroin chic cover girls on the magazine covers, no longer the sweet girls with the smiling face like you would have seen when I was a young girl, but instead you have angry, thin, anorexic type women who are very hostile to everybody on the cover. And I thought that was kind of a significant change. The Gilmore Girls on TV was very popular, had a lot of influence. You had Sex in the City, which was another influential television show. I mean, TV in itself was extremely influential. And of course, the advent of the internet and everything, and artificial intelligence is in our face today. That's how far we've come with that one. And of course, there was 9/11, and that was in 2001, and the war in Iraq. And now we've had George Floyd, we've had lots of racial unrest. Same-sex marriage was legalized. I mean, you just name it. We've just had one extraordinary, or I guess we'll just call it surprising events that have taken place. And so all of these things are just part of my timeline trace. But enough of that. What I wanted to talk about was I think that there's an old saying that you have to, if you forget the past, you're bound to repeat it. And what I've been watching recently is all of the attention that's being taken place in college campuses all over the country, the riots and the demonstrations against the Israel and the Jews, and the threats against Jewish students in these universities, and the advancement of the Palestinian cause and the cause of Hamas. And I just ask myself, how did this happen? And why are we in this situation that we're in today? And it reminded me of something that happened years ago. Well, it kind of reminds me of Black Lives Matter, and it reminds me of the all of the demonstrations on Wall Street and the riots in Seattle and Portland, and well, they were all over the country, but it was the similar kind of stirring up agitation and these riots. And we had them in my local hometown of St. Louis, where they wanted to tear down the statue of St. Louis, and they wanted to tear down all the statues. And I went to some of the demonstrations just to observe them. And it was really dangerous. It was very, very frightening. And so this kind of reminds me of that. I do remember, though, that at the time, what I did find out was that there were suppliers dropping off bricks, and so that the rioters could, smash the glass storefronts. They were being aided by somebody invisible that was funding and supporting these rioters. So I really thought that there was something to that was kind of it kind of caught my eye, and I wanted to think about that and see if there was some similarity to events that have taken place in the past. The thing is that people are being arrested, and reports cover the mainstream media outlets that this is spreading all over the country. And big and small schools are being affected. It's not just the universities. And it reminded me of another scenario that took place years ago. And it was someone that I read about, and I've heard Paul Kengor is a college professor in Pennsylvania, and he's a social scientist, and he wrote a book called The Devil and Bella Dodd. First, he wrote a book called The Devil and Karl Marx about Marxism and communism. And then he wrote another book about Bella Dodd. And Bella Dodd lived, well, she was born in around 1900 in Italy. And actually, I think it was 1904. And her mother brought her, she and her mother immigrated to the United States in the early 1900s. And they settled in New York City. And Bella was educated in the public schools in New York. And New York is a very liberal place, and it always has been kind of an enclave for all kinds of different groups. And the Communist Party is very, very strong in New York. There were 60,000 communists in the United States at that time in the early 1900s, which is something I would have never even thought about. But I found this out through listening to Paul Kangar's account. And 30,000 of the 60,000 lived in New York City. So Bella Dodd she just landed in the middle of this milieu of socialism and communism. And she was kind of brought up in that system in her education and with the people that they associated with and they lived near. And she was very bright and did well in school. And as she grew older, she attended Hunter College in New York, and then she got her law degree at NYU. And as I'm listening to the reports on the news today, they're talking about Columbia University and NYU as being the places where these Hamas and Israel demonstrations were started, and now it's spreading all over the country. And that's what reminded me of Bella Dodd, because that's right in the middle of where she lived and operated. And what happened is she adopted the sentiments of the communists, and she became an activist and an active member of the US Communist Party. And she was on the national board of the US Communist Party. And her job was to recruit people into infiltrating different institutions and organizations. She recruited over 1,000 members, communist members, into the New York State teachers unions. And she also was able to recruit communists into the Catholic priesthood. And she admitted in a book that she wrote later that she had recruited 1,500 communists into the Catholic priesthood, and that they rose in power and influence from that time on for the next, well, who knows how many years it would have been. But that would have been in the 1930s and 40s that they were recruited. So anyway, they've had a huge effect by infiltrating all these different institutions. And so she really gave her all to the Communist Party during the 30s and 40s. And she finally, well, she wanted to get out, and it's pretty hard to get out once you're in. But she did manage to get some help, and she was introduced to Bishop Fulton Sheen in New York, and he helped her a lot. And in 1952, she was actually confirmed at St. Patrick Cathedral in New York City as an adult. And in 1963, she had a book published called The School of Darkness, which was an account of this communism in the United States and all the things that were going on back in those years. And there's a connection between the past and today. There are many stories of different people that have had influences on us, and we just don't even really know about them. Thought precedes action. You're not going to act on something unless you've already thought about it and you kind of accepted this as an ideology or as something that you believe. And it's just pretty much a common statement. But, we can't just be angry that all these things have happened and that people have deceived us or that these bad things have happened. We have to just get over it. We just have to get past the anger. And I personally think that it's getting worse and worse as time goes on. and it's escalating to a point that it's almost, well, it is beyond us. I feel completely powerless in having much of an influence. The best thing I can do is to speak up, although most people don't want to hear it. That's why I'm doing the podcast, because I figure, well, if you like it, you'll listen. If you don't like it, you'll just tune it off and skip it. And that's okay with me. I realize that everybody is not on the same page on this, and I don't want to cause a lot of trouble. I just want to be able to express the information that I have and my point of view. And I also want to urge people not to lose hope, because I do think that there are many good things that are going to happen. Whenever there are critical times like this, there are heroes that do emerge, and there will be heroes. And there are some out there, we just don't know about them yet. So we just have to keep going. And I think rather than complaining, it would be a good thing to look for some of the virtues that we could explore and go after. We need courage. We need faith. We need hope. And we need love. And we have to be forgiving, but we also have to have prudence, justice, fortitude, and temperance. Those are all very important virtues. It's not just about forgiving everybody. We have to have them all. So I would say pray, and then pray some more. And if you can find some things to be grateful for, there's always plenty. I'm grateful for beautiful days, for my health, for my family, for my faith, and all the things that God has given me. And everything that I have comes from God. And I'm very grateful for that. I hope that you will follow along with me, and that you'll like what you're seeing, and that you'll want to stay with me, because I plan to interview some really great people, all kinds of people that are just amazing. So come back, and I hope to see you at the next podcast. Thanks so much for coming. Bye now.
Thanks for tuning in to the How Did We Get Here podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and share this episode with your friends and family. For more information and to connect with Nancy, email howdidwegethere1884@gmail.com.